Love Island right now is kind of operating, and I need you to stay with me, like modern day mythology. Achilles, Helen of Troy, Zeus. Yeah, that mythology is the same thing. Now, hear me out.
So go ahead, grab you a seat. This is gonna be a lecture. You know how we get down. Every summer, millions of people tune in to watch a group of complete strangers search for love. At least, that's what we tell ourselves that we're watching. But somewhere between the first coupling and the season finale, the contestants stop being contestants and they become heroes, villains, hoteps, birds. They stop being people and they become symbols. Before I continue, I should clarify something. I watched Love Island USA season 6, 7, and refused to watch season 8, and somehow, miraculously, I still know everything that happened. So for any gaps in my understanding, I consulted my season 8 expert, which is none other than my little sister. So if you got any problems, you can take it up with her, not with me. This isn't going to be a video about whether Casey was a villain or whether the girls in the villa are quote unquote birds. I'm not really particularly interested in any of that. Instead, I want to step back from any individual season and ask a larger question. What is Love Island actually doing for us? Scroll through Twitter or TikTok, you'll see thousands of people arguing, not about just what happened, but about what these people represent. One contestant becomes every toxic ex you've ever had, and another one becomes a face of colorism. The strange part isn't how these conversations happen, it's how quickly they occur. In this way, Love Island isn't really just reality television, it's modern mythology. Now, I know comparing Love Island to Greek mythology is a little bit of a stretch, and to a certain degree it is, but just stay with me, because like, when have I ever been known not to cook? Come on now. Ancient societies had Achilles, Odysseus, Helen of Troy, and we have islanders arguing over pancake. My point is that when people think about Greek mythology, they think that they were stories about gods, which is partially true, but really they were stories that help people understand the world around them and themselves. Love, betrayal, jealousy, the gods and goddesses were just stand-ins for other more complex ideas, and I feel like the islanders on the show are abstracted to serve a similar role. All the while, the audience and the producers are fighting over the pen to determine who gets to set the prevailing narrative. Now stay with me, y'all. The islanders arrive human, and then they leave as a culmination of our own projections, casting them as a certain god or goddess. The god of the hoteps, the god of colorism, the god of the bird. But let's ground this a little bit. In 1957, French literary theorist Roland Barthes published a book called Mythologies, and this was the main book that inspired this video idea. Despite the title, Barthes wasn't interested in Hercules or Zeus. He wanted to answer a much stranger question. How do ordinary things become symbols? For example, this could be asking how an advertisement becomes patriotism or a photograph becomes a representation of nationalism. He famously wrote that myths transform history into nature. It takes something that was messy, political, and deeply human, strips away all its context, and presents it as something that was simply always true. And I can't think of a better example of that process than Love Island, because Love Island is modern day mythology. Before we can talk about Love Island, we have to talk about what Roland Barthes actually meant by myth, because it's probably not what you're thinking. Because Barthes wasn't talking about ancient stories. He believed that mythology wasn't something that humans used to create, it's something that humans actively create today. For Barthes, a myth is any time an ordinary thing becomes a symbol for something much larger than itself. To explain this, I'm gonna give you the example that Barthes uses himself. He uses the example of a French cover magazine. The image shows a young black soldier standing at attention saluting the French flag, right? He then identifies three things: the signifier, the signified, and the sign, right? And the third thing is really just the sum of the first two. So the signifier in this example is the photograph, like the physical photograph itself. The black soldier is saluting the flag. The signified is the concept that it communicates. A soldier expressing loyalty to France. That's the signifier. So the signifier and the signified together, that's what makes the sign, which is a black soldier saluting the French flag, right? With all of its physical elements of what you're seeing and the conceptual elements of what that communicates. So that wasn't too hard. And in most cases, it ends there. But Barthes says something really interesting happens next, specifically in the case for myth. That sign, the black soldier saluting the French flag, becomes the starting point for a whole nother meaning. Suddenly, the photograph isn't just about one soldier, it begins to signify something larger. It can symbolize that France is a great and unified empire, that people willingly and proudly serve the nation. French colonialism is legitimate. Notice what didn't change, the photograph, but notice what did change, the meaning attached to it. That's what Barthes calls a myth. Not a false story, but an ordinary object that gets attached a much larger ideological meaning. Now that we've established that, this exact same process happens every night on Love Island. So let's repeat this Barthian process with one of the most popular scenes from Love Island, which is none other than when Casey returns from Casa Amor holding TT's hand. Aight, so boom, they walk up in the villa erupts. You mean the girls start confronting Casey about leaving Anaya.
Fuck you.
Thank you.
This decision isn't for Anaya, it's for me. Okay, fuck you. Fuck all the weeks that we had.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that, but...
Yeah, honestly,
but no,
that
we can't.
response is actually crazy.
No, I gotta say what I gotta say. I gotta say what I gotta say, though.
A whole lot of nothing.
No, whatever. That's cool.
And TT, you know, starts defending herself and Casey. It's a whole
situation. You though, so stop talking to me. I'm talking to him.
First of all, you a little girl, so you can stop
I'm not a
talking to me.
little girl. You just got
girl.
in here. Bitch, I don't know you. I don't fucking know you,
You
bitch.
can pipe down. I'm TT.
Wrong way to come in the villa, bitch.
On the surface, the scene is pretty simple, so let's just identify the signifier and the signifier. The signifier is the footage itself,
Like,
right? The
so
image on
fucking
your
stupid.
phone, TV, or laptop of Casey and TT holding hands together as the villain confronts them. So that's the signifier, but the signified is what that communicates, which is a woman defending herself and the man that she just coupled up with. These two things together, they form a sign, but it doesn't end there. It becomes the starting point for a larger conversation, and this is what Barthes would argue gives it its mythological attribute. Because many viewers didn't simply interpret TT as defending herself, they interpreted her as masculine, aggressive, someone trying to be the man in the relationship. They even made edits of TT, having her as a masculine man and put Casey in a dress. And this wasn't even the first time where racist edits were made of people on Love Island. I'm sure you all remember when Olandria was getting her face edited on pictures of George Floyd, may he rest in peace, by Hooded fans. Don't even get me started. I don't even got time to talk about that right now. Anyway, some people push back against this portrayal of TT, arguing that she was just doing what so many other contestants have done, which was speaking up for herself. But like I said before, notice what didn't change the footage, but notice what did change the meaning attached to it. The scene was no longer just about TT, it was about black femininity, about who was allowed to be outspoken. The long history of black women being seen as more aggressive, less feminine, or more masculine than their peers. In Bart's language, the original event became a vehicle for entirely different ideology. We saw this happen with Serena in season 6, Shelly and Alandra in season 7, and now TT in season 8. They become the signs through which people argue about black womanhood. So if mythology is the process of turning people into symbols, this raises the question, what kind of myths are we creating? Ancient Greek myths rarely ever ended in peace. They usually ended in war. Not because Greeks loved violence, but because wars reveal what a society truly believed. Who deserves power? Who deserves justice? Love Island operates in a very similar way. Every season eventually breaks into a series of wars. Not physical ones, but ideological ones. And in this villa, we saw wars over race, gender, who gets to control the narrative. And in each of these battles, the contestants stop functioning as individuals and start functioning as signs. Now, they call me Mr. Make Everything About Race. And that's the first war I'm going to be talking about. Not because I think Love Island intentionally sets out to make race the central issue, but because the audiences already understand the world through the lens of race. Take Anaya. One of the biggest conversations about her wasn't even about her relationships. It was about her wig, which is insane because I thought there were multiple times where Kenzie's hair looked a mess. My bad. You know, you're right. Let me stay out of it. Hear me out though. Thousands of comments were debating whether or not Anaya looked presentable, whether she was prepared, why would she come to the villa and not have braids in at least, or whatever the case may be. So very quickly, the conversation stopped being about Anaya and started being about black beauty and black respectability in these spaces. Now take Casey and Sincere. Now I get that this is a contentious topic. Were they both tripping in the villa and did things they shouldn't have done? Absolutely. Was Casey tripping for picking TT? Absolutely not. But did he say some foul things along the way? Absolutely. And when Sincere... And that brings me to my next point. Despite the two operating morally somewhat similarly, Casey received disproportionately harsher criticism, not only from the audience, but from the people in the villa. And I'm certainly not the only person who noticed this, which opens this conversation not about the two contestants, but rather about colorism and how darker skinned black men are read differently than lighter skinned black men. I've never seen this video, seen a video that was like, I just think Sincere just loves women so much. They like infantilize this light skinned man. I was like, this is insanity. I don't know, dude. It gets dicey. But we're still talking about race here, so let's briefly touch on Miss N-word girl, right? Alana. If you're not aware, Alana was this non-black girl that came into the villa as a Casa Amor bombshell, but then ended up getting kicked off because she got caught saying the N-word in a song like outside of the villa. But many viewers noticed that in her time at the villa, as short-lived as it was, she already showed that she was uncomfortable with the black men touching her during the challenges, specifically the black men, and then not the other contestants. Almost instantly, the internet fractured into competing narratives. Was it racism? Was it unconscious bias? Was it just a preference? Was it the producers editing it that way? Do I think that girl did it because she's racist? Yes. But that's not the point. The point is that it's not even like we're talking about Alana anymore. She became a vehicle for a much larger conversation about race and attraction. I could probably give example after example, but all of them follow the same pattern, which is that a person enters the villa and an idea is what leaves. If race was one battlefield, gender was certainly another, and for years, Love Island was thought to be a show that was mainly viewed by women, but season 8 definitely felt a little different. Because all of a sudden, timelines that usually discuss basketball, rap, or football were now talking about Casa Amor. Podcasts that never mentioned anything about reality TV were now having an opinion on recouplings, and much of that centered around KC. Whether or not people agree with his actions, many viewers, especially black men, felt as if they were watching the public lynching of a black man. Almost overnight, defending KC stopped being about KC and started being about defending black masculinity, whatever that entails. I saw LeBron edits talking about this is going to be KC, Corbin, and Sincere going into Casa. what? And even the Casey and Five thing was honestly so interesting. And it gets into this larger conversation about like sports rhetoric and red pill content. And that's like a whole nother video. My main point is that people were saying Casey and Five that didn't even watch the show or even know his actions. And I think that perfectly shows how these people are transcending what they came in as, which are just ordinary people. And then while we're on the topic of gender wars, I really want to talk about this term birds. Like, this is a really interesting case study in and of itself. A term that long existed within corners of the internet suddenly became one of the primary ways to describe women within the villa. Because the term operates as a stand-in to talk about irrationality or immaturity. A lot of people talk about how it basically is supposed to reference internalized misogyny within women, like girls that are male-centered. But at the same time, to what degree does that just excuse the actions of men that make women act like that in the first place? Be that what it may, I feel like these kind of things really get at how polarizing the gender wars were within specifically this season. And I find it super interesting how a new audience introduces new language, metaphors, and value system into the show. Is that a good thing? I don't know, but I do think the Love Island producers are trying to attract more and more audiences, which is why this season I feel like is more diverse than any other season we've seen. Because if they can get islanders that represent the black bourgeois class, the black lower class, white audiences, like white southern audiences, which is like what I feel like Kenzie really operated as, just as many communities as possible represented in the Islanders, then you can just have more people watching the show, and then they have someone that they can kind of root for or see themselves in. That's what I feel like they're trying to do. I don't think they're trying to make racism happen within the show. They just want as many races there as possible, and if that happens, I guess it's a plus for them. This segues perfectly into the final war that I want to talk about, which isn't between contestants, it's fought over the story itself. In ancient Greek theater, there's this body known as the chorus. It's basically a group of people that would stand alongside of a scene, and after something would happen, they would tell the audience how they ought to react. So let's say a sad thing just happened, the chorus would start singing sad songs. Or let's say something victorious happens, the chorus would be joyous. I remember reading Sophocles for the first time, the Oedipus cycle in particular, and in all three plays there's a chorus, and I thought this was such a fascinating thing because you usually think it's just the actors and the audience, but in this way it's like the actors, audience, and then this third emotional interpreter. So what's the chorus in regards to Love Island? I'd argue that it's social media, but with one caveat. We're not all listening to the same chorus. Different communities are watching the same episodes and telling completely different stories about what happened. Like, there's certainly a black chorus and a white chorus, and I honestly for the most part forget the white chorus even exists until there's times where they intersect. For example, Anaya had said that Fulani braid comment.
What? Oh, it's gonna be the bitch with the fucking Fulani braid. We knew
I
it.
remember seeing a TikTok on my For You page and I can't find it, otherwise I just play it for you. It was basically a black woman explaining to white people that, oh, if you didn't understand the Fulani braid comment, it's essentially the equivalent of if she said, oh, of course it's the girl with the straight blonde hair and the blue eyes and the brown eyebrows, whatever the case may be. I don't know exactly what the description was, but it was clearly something that white women would find as the pinnacle of white women beauty. Regardless, it reminded me that, wow, there's a completely different audience still watching this show, and usually these courses operate in parallel with one another, but situations like this are times where they actually intersect. Because all the comments were white girls talking about, wow, when you phrase it like that, now I really understand how bad this is. Like, I don't know, it was funny. But now let's really address the producers. Because if we're going to talk about narrative wars, it's really a war between the audience and the producer. And that's what's super interesting, because even with all the power that the producers have, never really know at any given point who's controlling the narrative. Because it's production responding to the audience, is the audience responding to production. It's like a chicken or the egg situation. The producers are certainly the Zeus in the sense that they are the end all be all. They are the ones that control the narrative in terms of editing, casting decisions, and twists. But they also read social media and they see which Islanders people love, which storylines are resonating, which moments go viral, and those things certainly shape future decisions for them. Meanwhile, audiences know that the producers are shaping the story, so they begin watching the producers just as closely as they watch the contestants themselves. So meaning is no longer flowing in one direction, it's constantly bouncing back and forth between the villa, production, and audience. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Roland Barthes argues that myths transform history into nature. Love Island does something remarkably similar. Enter the villa as people, and by the time the internet is done with them, they leave as signs. And once those signs enter the wars of race, gender, and narrative, they no longer belong to the Islanders, they belong to us. By now, we've seen the same process over and over again. Anaya becomes a conversation about black beauty. Casey becomes a conversation about black masculinity. Movie night is a conversation about production manipulation. None of these conversations are actually about Love Island. They're conversations that society was already having. Colorism existed before Love Island. Misogyny existed before Love Island. Producer mistrust, the battle of black masculinity, all these things existed before Love Island. Love Island simply gives these conversations faces. That's why people become so emotionally invested, not because they know the contestants, but because the contestants have been recruited into debates that feel deeply personal personal. People can watch the same exact episode and leave believing two completely different things because they're not disagreeing about the contestant, they're disagreeing about the world. Like I keep saying, and this is the refrain of the entire video, Barthes argued that myths transform history into nature. I'd argue that Love Island reveals that process before it's complete. We get to watch in real time as meaning is produced. A tweet becomes a narrative becomes consensus, and consensus becomes common sense. People stop saying I think and they start saying that's just who they are. But maybe that's never who they were. Maybe that was simply the meaning that we collectively attach to them. Earlier I called Love Island mythology, and I still think that's correct. Not because I think that the islanders are gods, but because I think mythology was never about God. It's about taking ordinary things and abstracting them into extraordinary ideas. Every summer, Love Island gets a new cast. The audience gives them meaning. And somewhere between the villa, TikTok, Twitter, podcast, and ourselves, the meanings start to become so familiar that they start to feel natural. And that's not reality television, that's mythology.